Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely crucial for visual storytelling, demystifying your camera settings. You know, if you've ever felt totally stuck, relying on your camera's auto mode, literally letting a computer make all your creative choices for you, well, you're in the right place. We're going to take back control and really step into the mindset of a true filmmaker.
Let's be real for a second. Have you ever hit record only to find out later that your footage was way too dark, distractingly bright, or just full of that ugly, muddy digital grain? It is incredibly frustrating when the image on the screen doesn't match what you saw in your head, right? But here's the secret. Professional filmmakers, they don't rely on luck. They control the light. And they do it by using three incredibly powerful, deeply connected settings. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at what exposure actually is. Then, we'll break down aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. After that, we'll bring them all together in the exposure triangle and wrap up with some real-world filmmaking decisions.
So, part one, what is exposure? Let's lay the foundation.
Before we get into the technical weeds with all those dials and buttons, exposure is, quite simply, the exact amount of light that reaches your camera's sensor. That's it. If you let in too little light, your image is underexposed and way too dark. Too much light, and it's overexposed and blown out. So the core goal here is really just balancing that light to capture the exact mood you want. It's all about intentionality.
Moving on to part two, aperture. Think of it as the window.
To wrap our heads around this first pillar, let's use a really simple analogy. I want you to imagine that your camera is a dark room with a single window. The aperture is, quite simply, the physical size of that window. Naturally, if you open a window wider, it obviously lets a whole lot more light into the room, right? And if you close it up to just the crack, the room gets darker.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the creative side effect of that choice, because brilliantly, changing the aperture doesn't just change the brightness. Yes, a wide aperture gives you a brighter image, but it also creates that beautiful, cinematic, blurry background that makes your subject totally pop. On the flip side, a narrow aperture makes the image darker, sure, but it gives you deep focus, keeping almost everything from the foreground all the way to the background razor sharp.
All right, part three, shutter speed, the curtain.
Building right on that room metaphor, you have your window, right? Your aperture. Now, I want you to imagine a heavy curtain opening and closing in front of that window. Shutter speed controls exactly how long that curtain stays open. It dictates the exact duration of time that the camera is actively collecting light from your scene.
And this brilliantly illustrates the dual impact of shutter speed. See, a slower shutter speed keeps the curtain open longer, bringing in tons of light, but any moving objects are going to become smeared with motion blur. Alternatively, a fast shutter opens and closes in a fraction of a second, so less light enters, making your image darker, but fast movement appears perfectly sharp and literally frozen in time. You're constantly balancing the amount of light with how movement actually appears on screen.
Next up, Part 4, ISO, or sensor sensitivity.
Now, this shifts us away from the window analogy completely and deals directly with the internal electronics of your camera. ISO controls how sensitive the camera's sensor is to the light hitting it. A low ISO gives you a super clean, high-quality image, but you do need plenty of actual light in your environment to make it work. So the crucial point is this: while cranking up to a high ISO artificially boosts your brightness and helps immensely in dark environments, it comes with a really steep creative cost. It introduces that visible digital grain or noise into your footage. Honestly, you only want to increase this when you absolutely have to.
Bringing it all together in part five, the exposure triangle and balancing those settings.
This right here is the absolute climax of our explainer today. It's the true aha moment of cinematography. These three settings are fundamentally connected. You literally cannot change one teammate without needing the other two to step up and help maintain the balance. For example, if you close your aperture because you want everything in focus, well, your image instantly gets darker. To compensate for that lost light, you now have to either slow down your shutter speed or bump up your ISO. It's just a constant, delicate balancing act.
Let's walk through a practical scenario to see how this actually plays out. Imagine you're shooting an interview outside in bright daylight. Step one, you want a cinematic, blurry background, right? So you set a wide aperture. But wait, step two, now your image is way too bright because it's super sunny out. So to fix this, in step three, you balance the triangle. You dial in a fast shutter speed and a very low ISO. That combination reduces the light coming in, perfectly balancing the exposure while keeping that gorgeous background blur.
And finally, part six, real-world filmmaking decisions and achieving that real-world balance.
All right, it's time to take this framework and look at exactly what you should and probably shouldn't be doing. There's a really stark contrast here between a novice and a professional. For instance, a huge beginner mistake is immediately cranking up the ISO the second an image looks dark. That just completely ruins the footage with ugly digital noise. A pro, on the other hand, balances all three exposure settings first. Beginners also tend to mess with their shutter speed without realizing it can make movement look weird and jittery. And finally, never forget that changing your aperture to let in light is definitely going to alter your background blur. A pro always keeps those secondary effects in total control.
And this brings us to a really profound professional insight derived straight from our source material. Cinematographers rarely think about these dials and numbers in isolation. Instead, they look at a scene and ask, what should this feel like? The technical choices always serve the story. You're manipulating the light, the motion, and the focus to support the emotion of the moment, not the other way around. Armed with this knowledge, you're no longer at the mercy of your camera's automated guesswork. You now know that exposure is actually a powerful creative tool. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Next time you pick up a camera, what creative emotion will you choose to guide your exposure? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope you feel fully empowered to get out there and really start mastering the light.